Welcome to the Rich Report, a podcast with news and information on high-performance computing. Today, my guest is from the Ethernet Alliance. We have John D'Ambrosia, who is the chairman of the board of directors for the Ethernet Alliance. So, John, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Rich. Thank you very much. So, I sent you some slides. I'd like to spend a few minutes just to go over them, introduce everybody to the EA, and try to give them an understanding of what the EA does, and then we can talk a little bit about SC. How's that sound?
Sounds great.
Okay, so the Ethernet Alliance. So we would go to slide 2. So what is the Ethernet Alliance? What is its mission? Well, in very simple terms, the EA strives to be the voice of the Ethernet industry. And what we mean by that is, look, people ask, why does Ethernet need marketing? Why does Ethernet need promotion? The simple reality is that Ethernet is an ever-evolving, ever-growing technology. People need to understand what the technologies are. They need to know where it is. They need to understand the application spaces. And they need to know that there is interoperability there, that they can trust the technology. And that's one of the hallmarks of Ethernet. So the EA strives to provide that voice. We also look at trying to grow the Ethernet ecosystem. And what I mean by that is that, we live in a network world, and everything needs to grow together. So we're always looking at promoting all the existing and emerging 802 Ethernet standards that are out there. We look at accelerating the industry adoption of it. And really that is built on the understanding and basis that multi-vendor interoperability is there, it exists. That's what Ethernet has always done. You plug it in, it works. That's great. But the EA also looks at trying to support the development of Ethernet. And what do I mean by that? Well, the easiest way to say anything in terms of developing standards is it requires consensus building. And there's multiple stages of consensus building. It's at the early stages when you say you need a project, you need a technology, you need a solution. It's at the later stages when you start to talk about what actually needs to go into the specs and those sorts of questions. And it also goes into the understanding of the technologies and saying this is what it is, this is where we can use it. The interops themselves, you have to have consensus building on the testing, all of these different things. So we're there to support the development as well. And another thing that we've introduced over the past couple of years is something called the Technology Exploration Forums. And basically this is an opportunity for the industry to get together and discuss, and I mean discuss, what the needs are for Ethernet. Now, there's a lot of conferences out there, and a lot of these conferences have panels, and it typically winds up being more of a Q&A session when you think about it. The TEFs are really an opportunity for that discussion. So it's not really a one-on-one with Q&A. They turn into discussions about what does the industry need, where the panel becomes part of the audience. The audience becomes this big open room of people having discussions about, okay, where do we need Ethernet to go? So, these three things are really fundamental to what the EA mission is. Now, if we move on to the next slide, the EA is a very big organization, right? We've got over 80 members, and it's a breakdown. It's on this slide, you see a breakdown of the different membership, right? So we've got carriers and end users, we've got the component vendors, we've got the system vendors, we've got academia and their affiliations, all in there working together, and not really representing any one portion of the whole ecosystem. You got the whole spectrum in there, people talking to each other about what their needs are, where they need Ethernet to go. So you get a lot of different perspectives, right? And this is really the makeup of the EA. And that broad breadth that it has allows us to get a lot of different perspectives. And it also makes it a more robust solution when you finally do achieve consensus, because you've got a lot of different viewpoints there. Okay, so let's move on to the next slide. And this is kind of fundamental in terms of talking to the vision, right? So, and as well as the mission. So as I said, first and foremost, the EA is a marketing organization. We're a marketing alliance for the IEEE 802 Ethernet technologies. And what we do there is we're doing promotions, right? So we're looking at marketing, we're looking at education. But we build on this. We build on this to help expand the ecosystem and to support the development, as I talked about, the interop testing, expanding the market, going global. It's an ecosystem, right? And it's a networked world. And when we look at support in the development, we're talking about the consensus building again. We're talking about the TEFs. And we're talking about working with other organizations. It all has to work together. And, there are portions of Ethernet where we do go across different boundaries. We've worked with, for example, the IEEE has had lots of discussions with the ITUT, the Optical Internet Networking Forum. You have FCOE work that goes on. So there's a lot of different groups in there talking to bring this whole vision together. And these alliances, they're representing the 802 Ethernet industry, 802 Ethernet standards themselves. Okay. If we move on to slide 5, I can't understate or overstate, the importance of these Interops and Plugfests. Okay, so when we look at an 802 standard, these standards are written by a lot of brilliant people, and they strive to make these things work. But when it all comes down to it, they are still paper, right? And 802 isn't going out and sponsoring it in the Interops to show people that, hey, you know what? The technology really works. That's what the Ethernet Alliance is doing. So we're there. We're building the confidence for people to have in the new standards. We're ensuring the interoperability. We have a very close working relationship with UNH-IOL. And for those of you who are involved in the Ethernet, you know that UNH-IOL is really the place that people go to do testing. Right now, we've got a lot of focus on the data center bridging and the energy efficiency, but, there's a lot of emerging standards coming up. And we'll be looking at doing more Interops and Plugfests as these technologies are emerging. Now, if we move on to the next slide, here's just a sampling of all the different things that the EA has been doing. And we're doing a lot of stuff out there in the industry. We're doing our Plugfest. So we've got the 4100 gig Plugfest. We've got the energy efficient Plugfest. We've got the data center bridging. We did a TEF in June of this year. We were looking at next generation 100 gig interconnect specifications. A very timely event, as the IEEE right now has 2 new projects focused specifically on 100 gig, one doing backplanes and copper cables, and then a second one on next generation 100 gig optics, right? So this is very timely in discussion for the industry to get together. We also been talking a lot at several events. We were at ECOC talking about the 100 gig Ethernet optical interconnects and the different module form factors. We were at the Carrier Ethernet World looking at 100 gig beyond. We've been doing webinars. And, the thing that's really cool about the Ethernet Alliance, it's a thing that amazes me about Ethernet in general, so it's constantly evolving, right? What do you need out of Ethernet? Well, that's what we're seeing from the Ethernet Alliance. There's a constant influx of ideas of how can we best serve the industry and serve our members. So we keep coming out with new ideas. So, there's a lot of participation in a lot of different events. The TEFs we started doing in 2009, and they've been a very successful enterprise for the Ethernet Alliance. And now webinars. We're getting a lot of interest in doing these webinar series. And there's just so many different things going on for Ethernet, from fundamental building blocks. People express interest, because people, I sometimes take for granted the knowledge that I have working with Ethernet. There's still people out there who, don't understand or aren't as familiar with the specifications. So the EEA is looking at helping providing those basic education, but we're also looking at more advanced topics that will be coming out in the future. So a lot of different activities there to look at. In terms of the next slide, once again, a whole bunch of different events. So we have the Technology Exploration Forum in February of next year. It's going to be in Santa Clara. And I got to tell you, I'm just so excited about this event because this is really a fundamental perspective. Everyone's talking about, well, where does Ethernet need to go? Well, who better knows that than the end users themselves? So this next event is called the End Users Speak. And we're just having end users come in and saying their different viewpoints on what they're looking at. So these are all in the formative stages. I don't want to let out too much. We've seen the agenda coming out in the near future, but it's exciting to get the end users in there saying, we want to talk to the industry. So you have that cooperative relationship that's going on now where people are talking to each other. Lots of events coming on as well. We've got the SC supercomputing in Seattle next week. Real exciting there. The EA is actually sponsoring the next IEEE 802.3 interim meeting. We'll be participating at the Ethernet Tech Summit panel. and OSC and terabit optical and data in hands, and working with WDM networking as well. So just a lot of different events to be involved with. Webinar proposals, once again, different topics there, looking at cabling, looking at RDMA, and just broader 10 gig adoption. And I know there's other webinar proposals in the works as well. So leveraging the technologies themselves to provide education to the industry. So I'm really, really just excited about where stuff is going. Page 8 is a little bit more discussion on the TEF, and like I said, I'm just so excited by this. Getting the end users to come in and talk with people is always fascinating because they have real world experience about how they're using this stuff, and it allows the industry some very interesting conversations, and it's done in a very open forum. So you get a lot of people just talking with each other, and you can start to see the creative juices flow. It's like, okay, well, what can we do? So just really, really excited there. And, just to get a sampling, in this slide, you see a URL to some of the past events. Those papers have been published, and a lot of great material. I mean, there's stuff that's going on in the industry today that started at a TEF back in 2 years ago, around this time frame. It's just so exciting to see all this stuff come together. Finally, on slide 9, Ethernet Alliance is just involved with so many different industry trends. It's because Ethernet's involved with so many different trends. And, you look at it, there's virtualization, there's DCB, there's storage, there's, high-performance computing. We've got all these different speeds, 10, 4100 that people are talking about. And, honestly, it's amazing to me. So I was the chair of the 4100 gig project. And when we started that project, the end users cautioned us that as soon as we were done with the 100 gig, they were going to be coming back and looking for the next speed. And that's what's happening. There's a lot of discussions going on in the industry right now about the next generation of 100 gig interconnects and what's going to be beyond that. So, you see a lot of the building blocks that are coming out today to make 100 gig tomorrow's next high-density performance interconnect. And people thinking about, well, how do I use this to do 400 gig? How do I use this to do terabit? So a lot of discussions happening already. There's the cloud, another one. And honestly, we could probably spend the next 10 minutes coming up with a whole bunch of different other trends of where people want to take Ethernet. So it's just such a great opportunity. And, for those people who are out there who are involved, I encourage you to get involved. The Ethernet Alliance responds to its membership, and if you want to see things that happen, we encourage you get involved in the EA. There's a lot of different activities in there, and it's relatively easy to get an activity started. You just really need to be stepping up to volunteer. So, in closing, next slide, simple thank you. First of all, to the listeners for taking the time to listen to this podcast, but to everybody out there in terms of making Ethernet successful and taking the time to listen about the Ethernet Alliance and how the Ethernet Alliance can help make Ethernet successful further.
Well, great, John. A couple questions. Curious about your role. What's your greatest challenge? I mean, you're out there as a communicator for this, diverse set of companies and institutions, right? So what really, what are the tough humps you've got to leap over?
Lack of sleep, because there's just so much work to do. I say that facetiously, but the reality is it's really an exciting time right now. There is just so much work going on, and the current Ethernet Alliance Board of Directors is phenomenal. There's a lot of interest, a lot of energy, and just a lot of work going on. But let's taking a step back. There's a couple of challenges. One, obviously, is the technical problems are becoming more and more challenging. There's, not to sound political, but you hear a lot of people talk about hope and change. The problem is that hope and change doesn't apply to the laws of physics. right? The laws of physics are really what the laws of physics are. And as we start to do these higher speeds, there's a lot of challenges in there. You gotta make it work. You gotta make it work in ways people are used to using it. You gotta do it in a cost-effective manner. You gotta do it with power in mind. There's just a host of different challenges, and I find the problems are solvable. I've got faith in the Ethernet community and its members to solve the problems, but the reality is that they are becoming more challenging. So we've got that aspect. The other aspect that we do have is the fact that we do have a lot of varied interest. And I don't want to say it's prioritization, but there are a lot of different shows, and you go from show to show to show, and you deal with it. Supercomputing is coming up, so obviously that's getting a lot of focus. There's a bunch of shows that are coming up in the spring as well, so you're going to be talking about those things. So it's all of these different technologies and going all over the place. I got a great team in the EA, and we got a lot of people doing it, but at the end of the day, people still got to do the work. So the breadth of work and the breadth of evolution that Ethernet continues to go through is its greatest strength. But for the people who are trying to make it all happen, it's also one of the big challenges, right? Because as I started off joking, lack of sleep is one of the big challenges because there's just so much work to be done. And I'm driven by the technology. I love this stuff. I'm very active in the IEEE 802.3, and I think one of the reasons why I'm so active is because it's just so interesting to me. The technology development, seeing them happen, is one of the things that it's often you just keep reading about the stuff, and sometimes being the geek that I am, I forget. I got to get to sleep, or as my wife would say, I got to go do some work at home. So I think those are the big challenges that we deal with.
Yeah. So John, I used to work for a while at Sun Microsystems under Andy Bechtelsheim as his assistant, right? So he was always talking about when the subject of Ethernet came up, it was always about economies of scale, right? When does this technology follow the curve to the point where the price drops enough that it becomes interesting, right? And especially in terms of high performance computing, right? Do you think the Alliance has done a good job of not necessarily managing that, but of following that curve in the way that is served the user community?
Very, very good question. I think there's the multiple facets of the EA, and I think as we look to what's coming ahead, 40 and 100 gig is the sexy technologies. It's the new stuff. But I think everybody sees that 10 gig is going to be where the money eventually is going to be. And I say eventually because, it's like you start thinking about, number of port shipped and the economy scale and sort of stuff that Andy would talk about. You see a lot of it in 10 gig. And I think we do have a constant struggle or a constant effort to be focusing in on all of these technologies. And in some cases, you've always got to keep marketing yourself, right? And you got to keep trying to support 10 gig. And I think we've tried to do as much as we can, right? So for the 10 gig technologies, there was a lot of activity with the different, the backplane specs, with the 10G based T specs, with the different modules. And the EA has done a lot there. Now, is it enough? Well, that's a tough question. I'm one of those people that always thinks, what else can we do? Right? And the reality is that you do as much as you can, and you try to deal with it, but understanding that you've got the other ones coming along as well. I think in some cases, and I say this with a background, with my 4100 gig background. When you're working on supporting the development of 4100 gig, you are actually working on providing the work that is needed to show that 10 gig will be scalable. and deployable in mass numbers because, 10 gig is going to become an edge technology, and at that point, you need to know that the next core can support it. And I think sometimes that gets lost on people. We lose sight of the fact that it's an ecosystem. You'll hear me talk a lot about this simply because of my experience in the development of 4100 gig. There were a lot of people who were focused in on the servers. There were a lot of people who were focused in on the network aggregation story. And we spent a period of time where we were talking at each other rather than to each other. And you have to balance those things out. I think there is a lot of work that goes on. I mean, next week's, the supercomputing demo is part of that. You're going to see the existence and deployment of the 10 gig technologies, and you're going to see the higher speed solutions interoperating, and all this providing a network story, an ecosystem story. So your question is rather tough to answer because I think people might point to the fact that 10 gig isn't shipping at the same quantities and volumes that gig isn't. But all of that groundwork is being laid right now. Rome wasn't built in a day, and neither are tomorrow's networks.
Well, thanks for that, John. I guess kind of a wrap-up question here. Do you know much about the demo? I've heard a lot of rumblings about something pretty cool coming up at SC11 with, I think, RDMA and Ethernet and all kinds of converged technologies.
Yeah, I know a little bit, but I don't want to spoil the surprise too much. There's a lot of stuff coming out.
Okay.
I think those topics that you touched on, if you're looking at supercomputing, you're looking at HPC, and you're thinking, well, what can Ethernet bring to the party? I'd encourage everybody to stop by and see it. Ethernet is growing more and more in that region, in that space, and providing more of that solution. And I think you're going to see it. I mean, when it all comes down to it, it still winds up that it's still Ethernet. It's still the number one networking technology in the world. It's still what everybody counts on, relies on. And, I seem to have more and more groups coming up saying, well, we want to run this over Ethernet. We want to run that over Ethernet. Why is that? Well, because Ethernet works. And, you see the investment in it. You see the large number of vendors working on it, and you know what that means to you when you're trying to build a network. I'd encourage everybody, stop over, check it out, and I'm sure you're going to be excited. I know there's let me put it this way, the people who worked on it, you can hear them talking about it with an energy. They're like, this is cool. So I encourage everyone to stop by and see the coolness.
All right. Well, John D'Ambrosia, chairman of the board at the Ethernet Alliance, I want to thank you once again for coming on the show today.
Thank you very much. Pleasure was mine.
All right. So that's it, folks, for the Rich Report. Stay tuned for more news and information on